Today we're discussing Successor chapter strategy in 40k, which tactics are best, and which chapters it might be best to be descended from. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. In today's video we're going to talk about the Successor chapter tactics in Codex Space Marines and share my opinions as to which combos might be strongest. I thought we'd just start with a quick recap of how Successor chapters work, seeing as it isn't really the most intuitive system for newer players. When you have a force of Space Marines, if you keep them all the same chapter within one detachment, then you get a chapter tactic. You can choose any one of the famous ones, such as Dark Angels or Ultramarines for example, or Games Workshop allows you to pick 2 Successor chapter tactics off a list in the next page in Codex Space Marines. You can combine any 2 of these, or take the Inheritors of the Primarch Successor trait. Although other than lore terms there's no real reason to ever use Inheritors of the Primarch, it basically just gives you the exact same chapter tactic while locking you out of special characters or certain relics. Once you've chosen the combo that best suits your forces, you can then choose which parent chapter for your successor to be descended from. The rules for this bit aren't found in Codex Space Marines itself, they're found in the individual supplement books or the Index Astartes for Space Wolves, Dark Angels and Blood Angels, and you are a little bit limited as to what sort of chapters you can take. They have to be the first founding ones, and you can't be descended from successor chapters yourself, so you couldn't choose Black Templars, Death Watch, Crimson Fists or Flesh Tearers for example. Once you've done that, you get your custom combo of chapter traits. You can also use the Super Doctrine for the chapter, say the Ultramarines one Scions of Guilliman. That's the one that allows you to counter stationary for purposes of shooting in the Tactical Doctrine. You get that one on top of your successor trait. You get access to all of the chapter-specific warlord traits, stratagems and psychic powers, and the relics are sort of half-limited. In these supplement books there's a full list of relics, and then a section for special issue war gear, and successor chapters can only take the special issue war gear. If they want one of the others, then there's usually a stratagem to pay 1 command point to gain you access to it, so typically you wouldn't be able to have 2 of these higher tier relics if you were a successor chapter. The only other bits that you don't get access to are the parent chapter's actual chapter tactic. It's replaced by your new one, and any special characters that the parent chapter might have. Say for example, if you're playing a Dark Angel successor, you wouldn't be able to run Azrael in your successor chapter because he's actually from the core Dark Angels chapter. Some special characters are really quite powerful and a big asset to their codex, so being locked out of these can be a disadvantage. Generally you'd want to take the successor chapters if you get a more useful chapter tactic out of it, and that price is worth paying for the loss of some relic options and special characters. So now we've run through how they work, let's talk about some of the traits and which ones I think are the strongest. I've listed my favourites here in terms of combat traits, shooting traits and mixed traits. For ones that might help a close combat chapter, Hungry for Battle, getting +1 to charge, is almost always going to be one of the best. It can be a really big deal between passing and failing a charge, and Hungry for Battle makes it particularly more reliable for troops coming out of deep strike to get stuck into the enemy. I would typically be taking that one if I was taking a really fighting melee chapter. From there there's 2 really decent fighting bonuses. Born Heroes gives you +1 to hit on the charge, and Whirlwind of Rage gives you exploding 6s, unmodified 6s to hit, score additional hits on the first round of combat. That's when you're charged, were charged or made a heroic intervention. Out of these 2, I think that Whirlwind of Rage is stronger. Mathematically, in terms of expected damage boost, it's going to be the same as Born Heroes, and both are particularly powerful on anything with a negative to hit modifier such as Power Fists. I think Whirlwind of Rage is better though because it doesn't just happen on the charge, it also happens on heroic interventions and when you're charged, and also Whirlwind of Rage will come into effect whenever you're hitting on 2s, such as with a Space Marine Captain, which Born Heroes won't. Typically my go-to would be Hungry for Battle combined with Whirlwind of Rage for a close combat chapter. For shooting options, I think the Bolter Fusillade is actually one of the best. It basically gives your entire army rerolls of 1 to hit with bolt weapons, which can be particularly useful on non-core vehicles that wouldn't usually be able to get rerolls. It's really solid on anything from Intercessors to Assault Bolter Inceptors though, and it might mean that you can just get away without fielding a captain in your army, maybe buying a lieutenant instead. Another solid one is Long Range Marksman, a bit nerfed from before, but you get +3 inches to heavy and rapid fire weapons, although not flamers. I would consider this one if you're packing quite a lot of 24-inch rapid fire or heavy weapons. I think that's where you're going to get the maximal return for your investment. In terms of mixed ones, Master Artisans has been heavily nerfed since the last incarnation. You just reroll 1 hit each time you shoot or fight. It really doesn't sound the most overwhelming, but it will add up to consistent damage output over your entire army for the whole game, and it's particularly solid on any big single shot weapons, things like las cannons. Finally, again, stealthy is nerfed but still worth consideration. You automatically get light cover if you're greater than 18 inches away from the enemy, and this can actually be surprisingly powerful on tanks and things at the moment, as you can't normally get light cover on them any other way in the current edition. It's really quite a good defensive bonus for anything with an armor value that's not planning on being right up in the enemy's grill. For me at the moment, I'd be most convinced by Whirlwind of Rage and Hungry for Battle for a melee focused chapter, and most likely Stealthy in combination with either Bolter Fusiliers or Master Artisans for a Successor chapter that's going to be predominantly fighting at range. I'll quickly go through the other ones and why I'm not quite as convinced by them, though I think that a lot of them are definitely usable in the right circumstance. Indomitable helps out with leadership a bit. It's not great, seeing as Space Marines are already good with that. Duelist is a melee buff that only works against infantry and bikes. I think it's just inferior to Whirlwind and Born Heroes. I would personally take them over this. Tactical Withdrawal to fall back and charge, and Rapid Assault to advance and shoot assault weapons, both of which are okay, but I would personally take White Scars over those ones, because you get both of those included, and the far greater benefit of being able to advance and charge. Knowledge's Power can reroll some dice for psychic tests. It's not too bad, but it's only going to affect a very small part of your army. Scions of the Forge is for slower degrading vehicles, and I'd take Iron Hands instead. Stalwart means that wound rolls of 1 and 2 always fail. In all honesty, it's rarely going to come up unless you're playing loads of toughness 4 infantry and the enemy packs a whole load of strength 8 weapons. I think Stealthy is the better defensive buff. And Warded gives you a 5+ Feel No Pain type save against mortal wounds. Again, useful in the right matchup, but you might face entire armies that don't use mortal wounds at all. Finally, for ones that I basically almost never take, are Fearsome Aspect. A little bit of morale manipulation is rarely going to be useful. Stoic, which is arguably an even weaker leadership buff than Indomitable. And Preferred Enemy, which is a very weak melee buff that's again worse than Whirlwind of Rage or Born Heroes, and it only affects one of a certain number of factions in the game that you have to pre-decide before you meet your opponent. In all honesty, there are a few good picks here, but there are quite a lot of chapter tactics that I'd consider duds. So finally, let's just go through which parent chapters I think might be best for making successors out of. Firstly, I think that Ultramarines is quite a solid one. They've got some really quite nice options in their codex, including a few powerful stratagems, such as the one to allow you to redeploy pre-game, and the one that allows you to use Tactical Doctrine in first turn. They have that relic as well that allows you full rerolls against one target enemy unit, which could be a good bonus to a Successor chapter. Their extra leadership and falling back and shoot is okay. I wouldn't say it's the strongest, and I could quite happily swap it out for something like Bolter Fusiliers and Stealthy. The biggest downside is losing all of the Ultramarine special characters. They do have quite a lot of decent options. Next, I'd argue that Wire Scars are another potentially good option. I do think that their chapter tactic is very strong, but does lend to one certain style of play. Hungry for Battle and Whirlwind of Rage could make them hit a lot harder and combine with all of their melee synergy, including their excellent assault doctrine and psychic powers. Iron Hands could be an option to run as successors. I'm a little bit on the fence about them. The 6+ Feel No Pain is quite good on vehicles, but you could potentially replicate it with an Apothecary on infantry, allowing you to take other traits. It would be a shame to lose out on Phyros' 5+ Invul save bubble though, as that is quite good. Raven Guard I think lend quite well to successor chapters, mainly due to their powerful 1 command point stratagem to allow any unit of infantry to deep strike. It synergizes amazingly with +1 to charge and Whirlwind of Rage, and I think it's one of the few places that Assault Centurions can still be really viable. I think that Salamanders make pretty amazing successors. Their chapter tactic with its wound reroll and ignoring AP-1 is okay, and very powerful on some units, though in general it's nothing that's going to massively change your strategy if you did without it. With Salamanders, I think a lot of their strength comes from their +1 to wound with Flamers and Melters, their very strong psychic powers, stratagems and warlord traits. We know they're already very strong at the moment, and I think that Salamander's successors are one of the stronger armies in the game. Imperial Fists I don't think are quite as good, however. Compared with the Salamanders, I think that they get most of their strength from their actual chapter trait, the extra hits on 60s with bolters, and also ignore cover. For me, that will be the main reason to want to play Imperial Fists compared with all the other things that they can do, so for the most part I wouldn't be too tempted to run them as successors. Dark Angels, Blood Angels and Space Wars are really interesting, as until now we haven't had the option to give them custom successor traits. I think it could be a cool option for Dark Angels Greenwing, but much less so for Deathwing and Ravenwing, as Deathwing only get that really nice Inner Circle special rule, and Ravenwing only get their Jinx special rule if you have Grim Resolve or Inheritors as your chapter tactic. Otherwise though, for Greenwing units that don't have either of these rules, or for Terminators or things gaining the Ravenwing keyword from the core Space Marine Codex, I think swapping out Grim Resolve could potentially be a good idea, as well as a powerful buff to shooting and combat. It only ever happens if you're stationary, which is a bit problematic. In general, for Blood Angels, I wouldn't be too tempted to run them as successors myself, mainly because similar to Imperial Fists, I think a lot of their innate strength comes from Red Thirst. They already have +1 to charge, and +1 to wound in close combat is an absolutely amazing ability. Typically it is going to be as strong or stronger than Whirlwind of Rage, particularly on lower strength weapons such as chainswords. Finally though, now we actually have confirmation that Space Wolves will be able to run Successor chapters in their new upcoming codex, I think that a Hungry for Battle Space Wolves Successor chapter could be really interesting indeed. Space Wolves' problem in general has tended to be that they can't get them to close combat, rather than not being able to do enough damage when they're there, so a Wolfy successor with +1 to charge could get into combat almost as easily as Blood Angels perhaps. I think that could definitely have some potential with Wolfguard Terminators deep striking, or perhaps units like Thunderwolves charging across the board or arriving from outflank. Again, for them, one of the main downsides is having lots of special characters. They've got an absolute ton of them in the HQ section, and it would be a shame not to be able to access them. Overall, for viable parent chapters, I think that Ultramarines, White Scars and Raven Guard are all good, as are Salamanders and Space Wolves. So I hope that talking through the options has been somewhat helpful to you. There really is a fair bit to think about with these successor chapters, and it's quite interesting weighing up the things that you give up compared with the things that you gain. It can really push you in different ways within the same parent chapter. Let me know if you've had any good experience and are looking forward to running any successor chapters in 9th. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. And if you've been enjoying my videos, I'd just like to mention that the channel has a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description below. Making all of the YouTube videos does take quite a lot of time, and if you're enjoying regularly, then any support is massively appreciated. Channel patrons get to see certain videos much earlier than other people. There's regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and you also get automatically entered into the Auspex Tactics prize giveaway with the chance to win some big kits every single month. If any of that sounds good, or you'd just like to help the channel out, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.